the sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden hue upon the vast fields of Flanders on that fateful day, July 11, 1302. In the heartland of this picturesque landscape, an extraordinary confrontation was about to unfold. Defying the expectations of all who beheld it, a humble yet resolute Flemish army, consisting predominantly of artisans and peasants, stood poised to challenge the might of an entire French knight's army. The French knights, adorned in their armor, were sure this would be a quick and easy victory. As their commander, the Count of Artois, gave his knights the order to advance after their crossbowmen had dented the Flemish ranks, the ragtag peasant army braced for impact. Flanders, the lion, is our battle cry. In 1285, France's young, new king Philip IV, known as the Fair, ascended to the throne. Philip sought to regain authority over the county of Flanders, which was semi-autonomous but technically part of the Kingdom of France, and perhaps even incorporated into the French territories. Flanders was home to prosperous cities like Bruges, Ghent, Ypres, Lille, and Douai, known for their cloth industry and trade of imported wool from England. These cities aimed to gain independence from the Count of Flanders and the aristocracy through city rights, although they were internally divided between patricians and craftsmen. In 1288, Philip tightened his control on Flanders by withholding taxes. During the 1290s, he endeavored to secure the support of the Flemish aristocracy and successfully garnered the loyalty of some local figures. However, he faced opposition from a faction led by the Count of Flanders, Guy of Dampierre. Within Flanders, the cities were divided into two factions: the Lilies, who favoured the French, and the Lions, who advocated for independence. Flanders was not the sole concern troubling Philip, for King Edward I of England held the title of Duke of Aquitaine, acknowledging Philip's authority. The foundations of their alliance weakened after the fall of Acre in 1291, leaving cracks in their bonds. Tensions escalated in 1293 when a naval clash erupted between the English and the Normans, prompting Philip to summon Edward to the French court in an effort to resolve the conflict. Edward, determined to avert war and forge a union through marriage with Philip's sister Margaret, employed his diplomatic prowess. His trusted envoy, Edmund Crouchback, engaged in arduous negotiations. After much deliberation and strained exchanges, a fragile agreement was reached. Edward reluctantly agreed to surrender Gascony as a gesture of submission, with the understanding that it would be returned in due course. However, exploiting Edward's absence from the summons as a pretext, Philip seized all of the English king's possessions in France. The aftermath of this betrayal unfolded in 1294 as a covert alliance between France and Scotland. Long-standing enemies of Edward I entangled the realm in a desperate struggle for control over Gascony. The conflict between England and France proved a welcome situation for the Flemish. Guy sought support from King Edward through a proposed marriage alliance, but Philip invited him, his sons and nobles to France in 1294, capturing them. Though most were released after 1 year, Guy's daughter remained imprisoned until her death. Upon his release, Guy severed feudal ties with Philip and formally formed an alliance with Edward, prompting Philip to prepare for the invasion of the county of Flanders. But they weren't the only ones with an alliance, and the War of Scottish Independence redirected Edward's focus towards his north, rather than the Flemish rebels. Guy was on his own. In 1297, Count Guy's son, Robrecht of Bethune, seized Mortagne. Philip arrested Guy's supporters and occupied the castle of Lecluse. The French army, led by Charles of Valois and Rudolph of Nesle, crossed the border and clashed with the Flemish army composed of German mercenaries. Orchies surrendered, and the French army marched into Flanders, besieging Lille and burning down towns along the way. In August, the French army received reinforcements, and Robert of Artois led successful campaigns against Kassel and Saint-Venoxbergen. The Flemish counterattack led to a French victory at the Battle of Bullskamp, with significant losses for the Flemish. Lille surrendered to King Philip, while the Flemish army retreated to Roeselare. Meanwhile, King Edward I of England sent an army to Flanders, but found little support except in Ghent. Following the fall of Lille, the French army advanced towards Courtrai. Delegations from Bruges surrendered the city to Philip, and French soldiers occupied it. Pope Boniface VIII's intervention resulted in a truce from 1297 to 1300, during which the warring parties negotiated and fortified their controlled Flemish cities. Edward abandoned his Flemish allies and made peace with Philip in 1298. After the truce ended in 1300, the French invaded Flanders again, capturing several towns and besieging others. As towns fell, Count Guy, his sons, and Flemish noblemen were imprisoned, and Flanders fell under French control. Philip himself toured Flanders, implementing administrative changes. Following Philip's departure from Flanders, unrest erupted once more in the Flemish city of Bruges, targeting the French governor Jacques de Châtillon. On May 18th, rebellious citizens who had previously fled Bruges returned to the city and executed every Frenchman they encountered, an event known as the Bruges Matins. Suspects were asked, according to tradition, to repeat the shibboleth Schild and Vriend, meaning shield and friend, in order to distinguish the French from the natives. Most towns in the county of Flanders joined the Bruges uprising except for Ghent, which chose not to participate. The majority of the Flemish nobility aligned themselves with the French, concerned about what they perceived as an attempt by the lower classes to seize power. To suppress the revolt that was brewing, Philip made a decisive move by dispatching a contingent led by Count Robert II of Artois to march towards Bruges. The French faced a formidable opponent in the Flemish, led by William of Jülich, who mustered a predominantly infantry force comprised mainly of soldiers from Bruges, West Flanders, and the eastern regions of the county. What can such common people do against us? Even if there are many of them, 100 knights are worth 1,000 men on foot. The Count of Artois during the French Council of War. Commanders presented different strategies for the upcoming battle. In the end, the plan involved advancing with crossbowmen before knights broke through the Flemish ranks after crossing the stream. The French army comprised a diverse range of forces, including 2,500 cavalry knights, 1,000 crossbowmen, 2,000 pikemen, and 3,000 other soldiers. Italian and Spanish recruits fought alongside the crossbowmen and foot soldiers. The Flemish army had a structured organization, with regional divisions and leaders. The Bruges forces numbered between 2,600 and 3,700 warriors, including 320 crossbowmen. The Free Bruges contributed 2,500 men under the leadership of Guy of Namur, son of Guy de Dampierre. Ypres provided 500 soldiers, with an additional 500 in reserve under John III of Rennes. East Flanders added 2,500 troops, while Ghent contributed 700 soldiers under Jan Borluut. The Flemish army positioned themselves in a stretched U-shaped formation, with the Grote Beek and Groninger Beek serving as barriers. Kortrijk was on their right flank, and the Lys River curved nearby. They had 3 wings, East Flemish on the left, Bruggelingen on the right, and other West Flemish troops in the centre. The castle of Courtrai was protected by 500 soldiers from Ypres, with a small force holding the defenders of Courtrai Castle in check. The Flemish stood ready to face the French army as it deployed all around them. "We shall gain victory, I am certain of this. Beware, noble Flemings. Stand firm, because the enemy will ride towards you with much force." The Flemish army adhered to strict rules that prohibited looting and retreating. with severe consequences for violators. Meritocracy was valued as deserving leaders from the common people were knighted, reflecting a shift in importance from birthright to merit. Guy de Nemours and Willem van Ulich entrusted command to Jan van Rennes, fighting among their troops on foot to inspire courage. Positioned strategically, the Flemish soldiers, supported by reserve corps and men from Ypres, formed a formidable battle array with guild and noble banners, shining weapons and closely ranked soldiers. The Count of Artois' army, consisting of crossbowmen and light foot soldiers at the front, positioned themselves towards the two waterways that protected the Flemish troops. The knights, including the most well-equipped ones, formed their formations behind the foot soldiers. Observing the large formation of the Flemish army, the Count of Artois reorganized his 10 formations of knights into 3 larger formations, with 2 formations set to attack across each stream, and the third serving as a rear guard. The first large formation faced the Grotte de Beek stream, the second was positioned in front of the Groninger stream, and the rear guard stayed further back. The French light foot soldiers, including crossbowmen and shield-bearers, advanced towards the streams shortly after Guy de Nemours and Willem van Ulich took their positions among the Flemish ranks. The crossbows on both sides were fired, with the French shooting short darts. The Flemish crossbowmen defended themselves behind shields and returned fire, but they eventually gave way under the pressure of the enemy crossbowmen and the looming threat of the knights. The Flemish troops slowly moved back towards their tightly packed ranks. The enemy's bolts had limited impact due to the distance, causing minimal casualties among the well-protected Flemish crossbowmen. The French foot soldiers continued to advance and shoot arrows until their quivers were empty, and clashed with the Flemish troops. Artois understood his infantry would impede a cavalry charge and summoned them back. However, due to the chaotic nature of the melee, many troops did not receive the news in time. One of the reasons given in the chronicles is that Artois pulled back his infantry so the mounted knights could finish the seemingly effortless battle. They wanted the honor, and several subordinates urged Artois to allow them to charge. The formations of knights, led by standard-bearers, rode towards the stream, with the left wing slightly ahead of the right. Some foot soldiers didn't hear the orders and engaged in skirmishes, while others retreated as soon as they noticed the knights approaching. The battle group under Raoul de Nesle advanced swiftly across the Grotte de Beek. However, crossing the 3-meter-wide Groninger stream proved challenging for the heavily armored knights and their war horses. Some horses hesitated or stumbled, causing difficulties in the crossing. The French knights, with their lances, initiated a charge against the men of Bruges. The knights, protected by armor and armed with long lances, presented an imposing sight, but the Flemish soldiers stood firm. The wall of pikes and goedendags, thick, iron-clad clubs, held by the Flemish soldiers didn't give way, surprising the experienced French knights. While some knights managed to break through the Flemish ranks, others hesitated, knowing the risks of riding into the grounded pikes and goedendags. Nonetheless, chronicles detail how most of the noblemen courageously continued the charge. The charge achieved success in the center, where the knights had more room to maneuver, causing a breakthrough in the retreat of some men. The men of Bruges demonstrated tenacity and successfully defended themselves against the charge. Geoffrey de Brabant, a renowned knight, attempted a heroic breakthrough but was killed in the process. Raoul de Nesle also died in the initial clash. Willem van Ulich and his standard-bearer fought back fiercely with their goedendags, halting the charge. 3 formations of knights on the French right wing attacked the troops under Guy de Nemours, but the Flemish soldiers held their ground and resisted fiercely. The Viscount of Lens failed in his attempt to attack the Flemings from behind. Jan van Rennes intervened with his reserve corps and launched a frontal attack against the French knights. The French penetration was crushed, and the Flemish soldiers gained the upper hand. In a fierce hand-to-hand melee, the outnumbered French knights were overwhelmed by the large numbers of Flemish fighters. The Flemish centre advanced, pushing the enemy back toward the streams. The townsmen fought resolutely, and the pressure from the Flemish forces forced the French veterans to retreat slowly. Upon realizing the dire situation faced by the French noblemen, the Count of Artois made the decision to lead his formation of knights in a final charge to reverse the tide of the battle. Ignoring warnings about the deep Groninger stream, Artois fearlessly crossed it with his knights and engaged the soldiers of Guy de Nemours and the men of Ghent. Artois fought valiantly, even tearing a part of the enemy's banner with his bare hands, but he was eventually surrounded and attacked by Flemish soldiers wielding goedendags and clubs. Despite his pleas for them to spare his horse, Artois was mercilessly assaulted and fell, bringing his attempt to change the battle's outcome to a complete failure. The French noblemen, including Artois, were killed or pushed back into the streams, leading to a brutal massacre carried out by revenge-seeking artisans and peasants. None of the commanding noblemen who led the charge survived, except one who was captured. After defeating the French rearguard, the panicked French fled south along different roads, with those without horses being mercilessly killed. The relentless Flemish pursued them, reaching distant villages and continuing the slaughter. Within 3 hours, the Flemish had effectively annihilated the once formidable French army. The battle and subsequent pursuit lasted less than an hour, but the soldiers had fought fiercely since early morning, covering a considerable distance. Fallen enemy soldiers remained on the battlefield until burial, and the Flemish claimed valuable loot. Following the defeat of the French army, the Flemish solidified their control over the county. Kortrijk Castle surrendered, and John of Namur took control of Ghent, leading to the overthrow of the patrician regime in both cities and Ypres. More representative regimes were established, and guilds were officially recognized. The battle became known as the Battle of the Golden Spurs, due to the capture of 500 pairs of spurs, which were offered at the nearby Church of Our Lady. The French suffered significant losses, with over 1,000 men, including 75 important nobles. It wouldn't be until 80 years later, after the Battle of Ruzebek in 1382, that the spurs were reclaimed by the French, and Kortrijk was sacked by Charles VI in retaliation. Thank you very much for watching this video. Please leave a like, it really helps out the channel. If there is a topic, battle, or person you would like to know more about, let me know your thoughts in a comment. I would also like to thank all my patrons and channel members for their generous support. If you enjoy House of History and you want to support my work, consider joining me on Patreon. For just $1 per month, you will already gain early access to all my videos without any in-video advertisements. Don't forget to subscribe. See you next time.